to this story. Now, the Commission for Gender Equality is engaging with the public on the review of Section 25 of the Constitution. Officials want to ensure that women's voices are heard on the issue of land expropriation without compensation. The first stop was in Giyani, Limpopo. That was yesterday, that trip to Limpopo. The Commissioner, Busisiwe Day, joins me in studio now for a discussion. Ms. Day, thank you very much for your time. Before we engage on what came out of Limpopo in Giyani, let's talk about why it is important for women's voices to come through on this issue of land expropriation without compensation.
Well, women's rights have been neglected in relation to land. This is not controversial. This is in terms of the recent presidential expert panel on land reform and agriculture, which noted that women, by and large, since we began land redistribution, have been neglected. And there's been an inequality, but also women are still subjected to patriarchal traditions and cultural practices that prevent them from accessing rights. So this is why we need a much more prominent, or perhaps the amendment reopens the field to say women must be considered and must be at the center of land redistribution in South Africa.
Talk to us about some of the conditions that women find themselves, or what are some of these dated practices that continue to subject women in positions where they're not equal to men?
Well, it differs from province to province, primarily because a lot of women are in rural areas are subject to customary laws. So, for example, in the Eastern Cape, a practice that's undocumented that has emerged for the Commission is that women are often told by chiefs that they must bring a male person to stand in for them. So if it's a single mother who wants a land stand, they often have to bring a cousin or an uncle, and this means that they do not own the land in reality. In Limpopo, for instance, in Giyani, where we were, one of the practices is that the chiefs levy or put levies that are arbitrary and not determined or not determinable. So one person might be made to pay 3,000 rand for a stand, and another person might be made to pay 7,000 rand. And as we know in custom, people in rural areas never used to pay money or make monetary payments. You used to show respect through offering some sort of nominal payment which you could afford. So these are some of the practices that women are subjected to.
And some of the startling views that you heard yesterday from women, what are some of the things that they are subjected to, or some of the practices? So
some of the practices are practices which often discriminate because, as I stated, because there is no man in the household. So an unwritten rule would be that in order to go before the Kosi to ask for land, you have to have a male representative. And oftentimes this is a cousin. And oftentimes what happens is that after a while, this cousin realizes their power and say, well, this is my land, so you can move out. And the women do not have the right then to say, but this is my land, and you know the agreement that we had.
You speak about the fees that women or people who live in this land that is overseen by traditional leaders having to pay monthly fees. Why were these monies suddenly introduced, whereas previously, as you say, it was a nominal fee that you could afford?
Well, we don't know why, because it's not a written or law that they practice. It's part of this is part of why we're holding these community conversations, is to understand what real practices are being instituted against rural communities that are not documented, let's say. And so one of the things that we do is to document claims on behalf of women. One very prominent iteration of this practice is with the Ngonyama Trust, which is before the Pietermaritzburg High Court, where the Ngonyama Trust insisted on issuing certificates of occupation. So it's a similar kind of practice that's seeing itself in different forms in different provinces.
Very quickly for me, would you say, as a commission, I know that this is only starting, but would you say that the traditional leaders are using this as a money-making scheme?
Well, it does seem that there seems to be a monetary benefit the traditional leaders get from living against rural communities, where they should be administrating land, or they should be in the role of administrators, not necessarily that they own the land, it's their own individual land, but they administrate it on behalf of communities. But what seems to be happening is that either traditional leaders want to offset certain costs, and then they push those costs onto the communities, however, without doing it in a manner that is transparent, that is fair, and that does not discriminate against the poor and women.
Thank you very much for making the time to speak to us. She is with the Commission for Gender.